the very essence of the mental game is this. The only reason an event matters is because we make it matter.
Welcome to the Mullins Farrier podcast, where I will sit down and converse with the superstars, the overachievers, the masters of our craft. Each episode will be a deep dive into their personal philosophies, their habits, the tools they use, and the secrets to not only their success, but overcoming failure as well.
First, find somebody you can mimic, then find somebody you can stand, and then try to focus on one style until you master that style.
So if you say I can't do something, well, you're absolutely right. But if you say you're going to, you're absolutely right for that too.
People say that you shouldn't define yourself by your work. That is not true.
You know what Dave Farley does when he's, lucky enough to be at the World Equestrian Games? I'm watching other people work.
Yeah.
I don't think we do that enough.
This podcast is for all of you out there who share my passion for the job and the desire to always improve. These interviews will put you in touch with the inner workings of the role models we all want to emulate. So let's get to it.
There's only so many hours in a day, and it's a matter of what you do with them.
Welcome, everyone. Well, an old year ends and a new one begins. So to start out 2022 on the right foot, we have a very special guest for you here today. Before we start, I have some exciting announcements to make in the shopkeeping portion of this program. First off, I am extremely excited to be able to tell you that Gregory's textbook of Farriery will very soon be available as an audiobook. It is narrated by yours truly, and I can now say with full confidence that I have read that textbook cover to cover several times. I am truly honored that Chris asked me to do this project. It was a huge undertaking, and we couldn't have done it without the help of Heather over at Twisted Spur Media, who polished it to perfection. Keep checking in at heartlandhorseshoeing.com for availability. Secondly, the Victory Racing Plate Company has joined us as a sponsor. Since coming on board with Victory, my friend and former guest, Mark Hickox, has become quite the jet setter, and he's been out there representing them as they've been supporting many educational events and competitions. We're quite honored that they have decided to do that with us as well. So for the very first time, I get to say, and now for a word from our sponsor. Please check them out at victoryracingplate.com.
Victory is imminent today.
I once heard an old recording that said, "Victory is imminent today." Some might assume this means that victory is about to occur. However, the word used here was not imminent, but the less common word, eminent, which means famous and respected within a particular sphere or profession. In 1929, the Victory Racing Plate Company pioneered the aluminum racing plate as we know it today. And over 90 years later, they continue to develop work-saving products for the farrier while enhancing performance for the equine athlete. Victory is imminent today.
My guest today needs no introduction. He is a North American legend in the farrier community. Author, educator, toolmaker, competitor artist, Jim Keith is all of those things and many more. I was excited to have the opportunity to chat with this man. I hope you enjoy the conversation as much as I did. So I'm sitting here this evening at the AFA convention with none other than Jim Keith. Chris Gregory basically lined this up for me and spoke to Jim on my behalf. And then we got to have a phone conversation shortly after that. And Chris found out that Jim was coming to the convention, and I wasn't originally going to come, but knowing that Jim was here, I had to make the trip. So here we are with none other than Jim Keith. I guess we should start. I read your book on the plane ride down. Well, I finished your book on the plane ride down. I never called myself a cowboy. And there are a lot of pretty interesting stories. I learned a lot about just the cowboy lifestyle. That book covers, you said, the first 15 years of your working life?
It covered from about the time I was 15 when I started that stuff until I was about 30. And due to an injury I got in the service, I kind of had to quit horses for a while. Riding on horses, but I could still work underneath them. So that's when I had a little career change. It was about the time I turned 30.
Okay. And that career change, so you had learned by working on the ranches how to shoe.
Well, somewhat. I mean, you learned the first 15, 20 years of my life was just learning survival because we had some pretty rough horses in those times. And we learned a lot about horsemanship, how to handle those, how to read the horses, and how to read their feet. So that was pretty important information for me as I was going along. And then after I got involved in the shoeing full time, I had owners and trainers requesting things that I wasn't confident with and didn't know how to handle it. But, I'd heard a lot of stories about horses that overreach, you do this, they had a methodology for everything. But they seldom ever worked. So I knew then it was a major problem with diagnosing the exact cause. They didn't know exactly what was causing this. So that's where I kind of broke off the beaten path and I tried to find the reason for each thing. And you can have several things create the same syndrome.
Right.
But what you do for one will not help the other one. So we kind of had to pinpoint that in. And then I studied veterinary textbooks, and which was the only thing I had available at the time. There's a lot of good books written that I wasn't aware of, being off in my isolated part of the world. But so I never got the advantage of that. So I'm non-traditional in a lot of ways. And in some ways, I think that's an advantage. Of course, some ways it's not.
Yeah, in some ways, I imagine that at times it probably slowed your progress because you had to learn stuff you could have read in a book or...
Yes, we were reinventing the wheel many times. So, yeah, it was a slow process. I think it was a good process, but it just took so long. I used to tell my students they learn as much in 15 weeks as it took me 15 years to learn.
Right. That's what they were paying for.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So at what point did you decide to start the school and why?
There was a new vocational school moved to Tucumcari, and I knew one of the instructors there. He was an art teacher and a sculptor and all-around good guy. And he said, "Come with me. I want you to drive your truck down there to the school." And he took me down there and introduced me to the president of the school. This was a vocational school at the time, not an academic. So they were hunting programs to put in there, and they wanted unique ones because that was a off the beaten path. If they just had their normal, everyday run-of-the-mill classes, they would run out of their students pretty quick. So we had to lure students in from outside the area. And I pulled in there, and he said, "Open the back of your pickup up." And I did, and he brought the president up there, and he looked in the back of my pickup, and there was an anvil and horseshoeing tools. And he said, "Come in, I want you to look over the contract."
Really?
I did go ahead and get vocational ed bachelor's.
Oh, okay.
Just to maintain it, but at the time I didn't. And I didn't have to have it for vocational school. Academics, you have to have certain credentials, but if you got your trade down, you can teach a vocation. So,
right.
So that's what got me in school, and I'd been traveling a lot, and it'd been hard on the family. I'd be gone all week, and this part of New Mexico where I was at, we had to run a 150-mile radius. So
oh wow,
it was 100 miles a day. Every day. And, a lot of times I'd have to stay out on motels and stuff on there. And I'd get home for weekends and families wanting to go do something, and I was pooped out. So
Right. Yeah.
a little stress there. But so I was looking for something where I could stay a little closer to home. And this kind of fit both deals. I could stay at home and I could still shoe horses. Worked out great.
Perfect.
I've done that for 14 years. My goal then was to have the best horseshoeing class in the world. And I don't know about the rest of the world, but I think we certainly come close to being the best in the United States or maybe North America, because we had a very high rate on our 5-year questionnaire we sent out. We had 85% of people still making their living, or at least part of their living, from what they learned in that school.
No way. That's almost unheard of, even in
Yes.
just people starting shoeing.
Most schools, 1 or 2% is about what they were getting in.
Right.
I was pretty proud. But anyway, that type of school, and Chris probably doing the same thing up there, but it was self-screening. You know, a lot of people sign up for it for the glory and the glamour, but if you put them under enough horses, they realize where the glory and glamour is.
Yep.
And
whether or not that's actually for them.
if they're committed, then they'll stay and complete it. Now, we'd have about a 15% attrition rate before but to me, that didn't hurt my feelings and it didn't hurt theirs. I mean, once they found out that this isn't what they wanted, they needed to be out and pursuing their other goals instead of spending time there. So that self-screening program was a big help in that, and it really helped the success rate of the students, graduating students from there.
Okay. Now, did you find, was there a certain point in the course where most of the people would just basically throw up the white flag and give up?
Usually in about 2 weeks.
Okay.
Within about 2, it was pretty fast. And another thing I found out is it really took about 6 weeks before students were capable of really start learning.
Yeah.
The beginners that come in there, most of the time it took 6 weeks to get enough physical coordination, learn how to handle the horse's feet, how to handle their tools, and not be afraid for their life. Some of them were they're definitely afraid of what was happening.
Yep. And would you have horses come into the school, or did you guys go out on the road?
Both.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So at that point in your career, did you have more access to actual Farrier textbooks at that point, or were you still working off of?
Yes, we had Doug Butler's books come out, and Don Canfield, we used his a little bit. He was the one that had Kentucky Horseshoeing School before Mitch did.
Okay.
And then right now that same program is going, but it's an academic program, and they use Chris's book.
Oh, okay.
But academic, we used to have inter-school competitions with students. I had a good friend that taught Sulla Ross, and it was more academic.
Okay.
We were vocational, and we could go against their second semester people every 15 weeks, students there, and they had the better manual skills, because they were totally immersed in shoeing.
Mm-hmm.
And right now, the school I had in Tucumcari, it's become a junior college, and it's all academic based, and they're only in class, there might be exceptions to this, and they're only in actual horseshoeing class about 8 hours a week.
Oh, wow.
And maybe less in some cases. So that's a big difference between a 40-hour program. I mean, total immersion, I think, is one of the best ways to learn something if you're dedicated and have the time to do it. Jump in, ground or swim.
Exactly. There are so many aspects to shoeing. What were the hardest ones to impart on your students?
It's been a while since I was teaching those things. But one of the things that I really stressed was punctuality. And I said, your skills may be below average when you come out here, but if you're punctual and polite and run a business right, you can bump a lot of better qualified shoers out of there because they're not punctual.
Exactly.
That was something we really pushed, and we run our program that way. 3 unexcused tardiness, they were out. 3 unexcused absences, they were out.
Okay.
And they could get excused if they just call me.
Yeah.
But I mean, again, that goes along with that professional aspect of, you got to treat your customers right.
Exactly.
You're working with horses, but it's still a public service.
Right.
Business.
The horses don't write the checks.
Yes, exactly.
So you did that for 14 years. What was your next step after that?
Well, that was when they were in the process of converting over to academics. And I was not real comfortable with that, simply for the reason I stated. So I thought I would start my own school. And I did. I run a school there, and I run an advanced class. I had 2-week advanced classes for working horseshoers. But that was, in that part of the world, that was such a small target audience that I had.
Right.
After a year or two of that, I exhausted the number of people there, and I couldn't fill a class. So I was still shoeing horses, still had students there, still had apprentices or somebody helping me, still in the teaching mode over most of that. But then as we got to competing with the old program for people that had the horses that would allow students to use them. Not everybody allows students to work on their horses. So it got so erratic, it was just hard to maintain that clientele basis on your horses. So
for sure.
That was one of the factors. So there's several little factors. And then we experimented a little bit with taking in beginners. And the program I had there at the college when we first started it, I had an assistant instructor that loved beginners. And he could go down there and spend hours patiently showing how somebody to approach a horse and pick up a foot, where that just bored the hell out of me.
Not your style.
So I really didn't like starting complete beginners, but the ones that challenged me were the ones that knew enough where they could ask good questions and challenge me. And we were doing some research projects, and we had some very interesting findings that we come from there, and we should have got some of those published. But they helped improve my perception of what's going on in horseshoeing. And that was a requirement for graduation, was to do a research project.
Oh, really?
And some of them were really good. I mean, we done a lot of video conference. We had there's a fellow down in Georgia had a clothesline cam, but he had a camera on the clothesline. You had to walk. Well, we had an El Camino cam, which we'd have one student in the back laying down. We had a mount off the receiver hitch on the back of the truck where you put that video camera. And they could run along there parallel to the horse and take side views of the horse in motion. They'd get in front of it and sit from the front, and they couldn't do much from behind. But if you get a side view and a front view, you can cover most of it.
Yeah.
But some of them come up with some clever, we learned a lot about hoof capsule movement on that, and the ability of horses to compensate for unlevel or poorly prepared feet. We used 3/4 inch screw-in caulks on the sides or the heels or on the toes or whatever to imbalance the foot both laterally and medially and anterior posteriorly, and videotape that. And it's amazing how so many horses can immediately compensate for that.
Right.
And we never had guts enough to leave them in those shoes for 2 or 3 weeks to see how but that was some pretty eye-opening material there that we could see in good slow motion there, that some of these horses that were 3/4 of an inch high on the outside still had a pretty normal gait. They had to struggle to do it, but they were doing it.
Right.
And so it kind of took away in my opinion anyway, the importance of watching the horse walk, because they can compensate for almost anything that's done to them in the short term.
As we all know, when we're in our first 5 years of the career.
Yeah, that's how they survive. What they can't survive, and that's another thing, students, we had very few problems with students because they'd all make different mistakes. But if you get somebody in a rut and he makes the same mistake every time, year after year, that's probably more harmful to a horse than one that...
Right, than a one-off
Yeah.
situation.
To me, more beneficial than it was probably the students. Of course, they got something out of it and retained it. But I got to go through that for 14 years with those advanced students. So I learned a lot about it, and I was looking at it from a different perspective than most people are.
Right.
It's still, I've read up on it, and I find that there's a plausible explanation for their perspective, and there's also an explanation from my perspective. So we're looking at different things.
Yeah.
You know, we're looking at the same mountain from a different side.
Well, and it must have been neat because the advent of actually having video and being able to, like on your El Camino cam, actually being able to follow along, that must have changed because there's so much that you can't see if you're not right there with them.
Yeah, the slow-mo on that cam was the big help. And, you know, right now, technology is giving us some tremendous aids that I haven't even seen yet. I'm aware of them, but...
yeah, there seems to be new stuff coming out all the time.
Oh, gosh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Now, when we talked previously, you were talking about your involvement with the AFA, and you were a tester for them or an examiner?
I was one of the first certified journeymen.
Okay.
And I'm not positive on this, but at the time I took it, I think I was one of 12 people in the United States that had taken it. And of course, the requirements were not nearly as stringent then as they are now. When I got judged, the testers were 2 appointed members of each association. You know, they were appointed because they were well recognized as experienced farriers. We were in Albuquerque shoeing horses as a benefit raiser for the association, and somebody brought up the subject, why don't you take your journeyman? You didn't have to take your other test before then. You could go straight to journeyman if you thought you were up to it. And I hadn't planned on it or anything, but said, okay, if you can find a horse, and we got the certification people here, we'll do it. So they went and found me a 2-year-old bronc.
Of course.
And that horse, he was pretty suspicious of everything that was going on there, but he got along. He held it pretty well until we got to the first burn on the foot. And when I burnt that first clip in, he jerked loose, snorted, pawed my horse shoulder, knocked the beer can out of his hand, and run off. They stopped my time while they chased the horse. They come back, and that horse had run through a hot wire.
Oh, no.
And he was upset.
Yep.
And they started my time again. I fit all the other clips cold because I didn't.
You wanted to live through the day?
And that rascal wanted to kick anybody that got within 10 foot of his rear end. And the examiners, they picked up the front feet, scored them, and then just walked away around the hind feet. Now, I got to be president of the Registry of Professional Farrier Educators, which is an association for school instructors.
Okay.
And in the bylaws, it said that membership will be certified horseshoeing instructors. It didn't say what certification. So I got a number of people, Grant Moon, Jim Ford, Bob Pethick, and to assist me on that, and Dennis Manning. And we decided then, well, Doug Butler was in on it, but he insisted on the fellowship from England. And I said, Doug, we got to put this before the membership, and we got to give them something to start with here that over 50% will think they can pass.
Right.
And so a fellowship, I mean, well, Doug and Chris and a few, not too many of them taking that.
You're right.
But so we decided on the AFA journeyman test, and we give free clinics around the country at horseshoeing schools to try to certify these people. We never got a turn one of them sorted for it. But in the meantime, I know Grant, we were leading by example. Grant recertified several times, and I did too. Every time the test got a little harder, I recertified and so forth. Well, I don't know why I can pass it now. But I did up to that point, but we never got that done, and eventually that chapter dissolved over that issue. I wasn't president of it at the time,
Oh,
But
okay.
it did dissolve over that issue. But that was, I mean, these were people that put that in their charter that membership would be certified. So
Right.
I pursued it, but none of them wanted to be certified. Said you got to change the charter.
Yeah. So this was membership of the AFA. You had to be
Well,
certified.
this was a chapter.
A chapter of it.
the
Oh, okay.
AFA.
Gotcha.
Mhm. We had some good support. I mean, there's a lot of people helping on that. We had a lot of veterinarian help and pretty good support from anywhere we needed it, because almost everybody in the AFA, at least the upper echelons of it, wanted a higher quality graduate coming out of school.
Mm-hmm.
And if you think horseshoers are hard to get to agree on anything, you only get horseshoe instructors.
At next level. That's interesting. I'm sure there are so many stories like with your involvement in that organization and so many other things that seeing it come up through that time, it must have been pretty interesting. What got you into it in the first place? How did you find the AFA?
You know, this is the 50th anniversary of the AFA, and I've been in it for 40 years. I'm a life member now.
Yeah.
It was after I started teaching, and I realized that I was probably not doing the best service I could for my students. And the convention was in Albuquerque in 1981. And my wife was a news racer reporter there, and she said, let's go over and I'll do a little photojournal deal on that. And well, I got over it. And I had been doing most of the things. I had been making some shoes, but I was terribly slow at it. And I went over and I kept seeing guys that were, I mean, those contests, they were doing what was taking me 4 hours to do. They were doing it in an hour. Well, that was a pretty good eye-opening experience for me there.
No kidding.
And Beth Garner, her husband and her run the GE Fords at the time.
Okay.
And Beth was I'm not sure her exact title was, but she was the AFA's director of education. And she was a sweet lady and determined, and she had her whole heart into improving the education of that. And she was the second person I met when I got to the convention. She invited me to the educator's breakfast. And that's what eventually turned into the registered professional educators.
Wow.
So the fact that we had people that could do the Ford, and these were all people from the East Coast. We had some of the British guys over here. Edward Martin was here, and I think Darlow and several others there. And I mean, it was just fantastic to me to see all what they were capable of doing.
Mm-hmm.
Then to meet somebody like Beth that was really pushing for education. Now, she had no power to enforce anything. Of course, they were talking then about licensing, and some people, it's a no in between on that. People either hate it or love it.
Yeah, it's been an interesting topic to bring up when I do these interviews.
Really, if they ever want to have the same status as veterinarians, they're probably going to have some form of some way to control the people that's in there, some form of licensing. But that's none of my business now.
Not a battle you want to fight?
Yeah. But we were trying to do it in-house, and that was the thing on the certification of horseshoe and school instructors.
With that, your AFA, that's how you got involved with it. And then from then on in, you just kept coming out to the conventions and stuff. For somebody like me, it's hard to imagine a time where you didn't have access to a phone that you could find these things out, like where they were happening. And like, it must have taken a lot of planning to sort these things out.
Well, the AFA started in 71, and I had seen a couple of people that were members of it, and I wasn't impressed by the quality of their work. Now, I was guilty of judging a book by one or two paragraphs that way, but I mean, that was the first turnoff. And then the rumors was that it was all toward licensing and government control of it,
Right. Which
never
doesn't
was,
sound
I
good.
don't believe. But
Yeah.
But that was a rumor going around, and it wasn't until I needed to learn more. I realized I needed to learn more that I got involved with it, and it really impressed me the first time, and it continues to impress me.
Yeah. No, it's when you get that many people who are all working on improving themselves together, it's pretty addictive.
So I made basically every convention since then for years, and then, I competed. I went to competing. Well, when I saw that first one, I was competing and went to competing the next year or two. I didn't do any placing until 1985, and I let Edward Martin beat me in the draft shoe match. You don't let Edward Martin do anything. He does it. but anyway, and so I made the team in 88 as an alternate, and then went as an alternate. I didn't go, but then I become team manager for a while, and so that kept me interested in that side. Plus the academic side of it was coming along. The earlier academic aspects, lectures and stuff, were pretty basic, everyday stuff, and now then we get a little science mixed in with it. So it's a growing field there.
Yeah.
And the manual side of it is, it's reached a peak. It's hard to tell whether it's going to continue going at the same rate or whether it's about to peak out or what. But they're doing some beautiful work now that's just going to be hard to beat. And so I'm glad I'm not competing.
I've heard a lot of people say that just the standard keeps getting higher and higher.
Yeah.
And I imagine now with so much access to each other and being able to watch videos on YouTube of people's work, it can't help but get better. But you're right. I never even considered that there might actually be a peak in there at some point. I guess all things have to come to an end at some point.
Well, racehorses, there's a lot of discussions about their speed has peaked, and it's got to slow down its growth anyway, if nothing else. But, the times have changed. In 1971, when this has started, landline telephone was the only means of communication other than newsprint.
Yeah.
Very seldom was anything involved with television. Television was around then, but it didn't deal with anything related to horses. In the 60s, the horse was probably the least studied animal in our agricultural colleges. They studied food animals. They knew more about pigs and goats than they did horses. But after the 60s and the horse population started growing, then it became a new learning expense as colleges started taking up studies on it. And in our part of the world over here, New Mexico, we had basically lost 2 generations of knowledge from existing farriers.
Oh, okay.
Nobody was shoeing horses on a professional basis in that area that I was aware of for a long time.
Wow.
And so that apprenticeship was definitely out.
Yeah, non-existent.
Yeah. And I knew of 2 schools at the time. One of them was Bud Beast in Sperry, Oklahoma, and one of them was Cal Poly. And that's the only schools I knew of at the time. There might have been more, but Canada, I think, probably had some.
Okay.
At that time, I was married and supporting a family and couldn't take the time off to go do that thing. And there wasn't any way to get materials. So a county agent got me O.R. Adams' Lameness in Horses, 3rd edition. And I had that book, at least the part on lamenesses, pretty much memorized. We could go to I'd go with a client to a vet's office, and when the vet come out with the diagnosis and prescription, I could tell you just about what page she read that.
Right.
But he got paid for it, but I couldn't get paid for that. But that was really interesting to learn there. Another section on shoeing in there and I tried them all, and they didn't work. And one of the statements in that book was, if you took a certain modification and put it on a horse and it didn't work, you might reverse it and it worked.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a clear admission that they didn't know what the hell the problem.
Yeah, no kidding.
Well, that right there enlightened me enough to know that we got to figure out, we got to define the problem before we can
Go about fixing it.
So that helped me a bunch. At least it got me looking and observing in the right direction. And I passed that on to my students, but I didn't pass it on in writing. I didn't write much, and I didn't do podcasts.
You didn't.
So there's a lack of information in there. And see, the AFA come in there and fill that gap.
Yeah.
I mean, they were the best vehicle in the world for that. And then after that, the chapters were going real good. Each state had an active chapter of the AFA. And then later on, other organizations got into it. We had some that didn't work too well, and we had some, the summit up there is pretty educational. It's for the, not much for the manual skills, but for the cognitive skills, it's great. And then Craig come in with his WCB, and boy, that really boosted the manual skills considerably. Yeah. And other associations have come and gone that have helped spread the word.
Right.
And so there's very few people that haven't been exposed to a lot more information. And the computer right now, search anything you want to on that computer, and some of it will be good. And
yes.
Some of it, you just need to be smart enough to know.
Yeah, which is which.
Yeah.
For sure. So from teaching, how did you get into making tools? Now, I know there was a step into the shoemaking business for a while first, right?
Well, even when I was working on ranch, I made most of my own equipment. I made spurs and bits.
Oh, okay.
I made most of the tools that I used, and that carried on through all the years, because in the 70s, there wasn't any horseshoeing tools to speak of. Diamond was producing a nipper, and GE was going, but the other tools, there wasn't much source for those. Rasp, some of them were good, but most of them weren't. So the forge working tools was one that was really behind. You could go raid a junk pile and find you some tongs or something in. But so I've always kind of been making tools.
Oh, okay.
But then the shoemaking, for a while, I was the designer for shoes for a company out of Mexico. And then I got to be the U.S. distributor for those shoes. And our research on it told us that most farriers, when we asked them what they wanted to see in the horseshoe, they wanted to see one that would last longer. So when we give them a shoe that lasted longer, it made the shoe harder to shape.
Right.
They didn't like it. I mean, they wanted one that was easy to put on. They didn't want one that lasted longer.
They didn't know what they wanted.
Yeah. So that hard shoe down there, I mean, it got cussed a bunch. And then Mexico's economy, well, that was up toward the 90s, but we were selling quite a few shoes in the States. And Mexico's economy went south. Cattle market went down. And this was a ranching company that built this stamping plant down there. I expected that they would really get interested in shoemaking because cattle weren't worth anything.
Right. Yeah.
But they didn't. And it ended up that I eventually sold my share in the company and got out of it and bought my own horseshoe. I bought Breckenridge up out near Detroit and moved it down there and started making my own shoes. And that was a learning experience in itself. I thought difference between union labor in Detroit and Tucumcari minimum wage would be a big step, but my training was there. There wasn't anybody in the whole eastern half of New Mexico, or maybe the whole state of New Mexico, that knew anything about punch presses. Where in Detroit, they used to go. Yeah, they used to go get guys released from jail. Every one of them with a punch press operator.
Right.
I didn't have that resource here, and so I was really the training in there, and the people that going for that kind of job. There's a high turnover. I mean, that's a repetitive job. You stand there, and some people can do that forever, stand there and feed a press all day long. It just tickles them to death. But others, like me, I'm one of them. I'd have quit the second hour. So, but I done all the design work on it, and I picked up CNC skills and programming. I can program a thing, and we got to making our own designs because designs was, I got to making our own dies. Dies was costing $2,400 a set. That's a top and bottom die for a horseshoe. 90-day turnaround. And we were short of dies all the time. We pushed our dies beyond their capability, and consequently that hurt the quality of our product.
Right. Yeah.
So we got to get on that. So that learning, well, the old guy up there in Detroit that was doing that for us, he said, you can probably get that done on CNC mill. We was using that. They make a carbon impression and burn that in.
Oh, okay.
And makes a very precise die. But
right.
It takes some pretty expensive equipment to do that. And he said you can probably do that on CNC mill. And I'd never run a mill. I'm not a machinist. And I got on the phone and I called every company that sold machines from Dallas to Phoenix, and all of them tried to sell me their most expensive machine.
Of course.
And one of them in Albuquerque said, why don't you bring one of your parts over here and we'll see if we can cut it.
Okay.
So I did, and that's how I got into CNC machining. And I ended up with 3 of them. I still have them, and actually 2 of them still works. Then I had to learn programming. That's where I'm not proficient with computers, but I had to learn how to program them things.
Wow.
But then I could make my dies for about $40 and turn them around in a week.
Instead of
so
24.
That was a big boost on that. And then when I sold to horseshoe manufacturing, they didn't want they wanted me to continue making their dies. And I did for a couple of years.
Oh, okay.
But my machines were getting wore out then. They wanted closer tolerance than I did. This is a horseshoe, I think, give or take 5,000ths of an inch.
It's sufficient
close,
enough.
But they wanted within 1,000th of an inch, and my machines couldn't handle that tolerance, so they had to get them another CNC shop down in El Paso. But I had those machines, and I didn't have enough die work to keep them busy, so that's when I got to making fullers, started adding on the tool line, is just to keep them machines paying for themselves.
Right.
And then I kept them going. The biggest problem was labor over there on that. I had to have at least 6 people to operate. If I only had 5, then I had the others sweeping the floor and greasing machines, not making any money.
Yeah.
Then I decided that's just more than I want to handle. And Kurt Carlson, he used to be the tool and die man for St. Croix Fords, was a good friend of mine, and he was ethically obligated not to divulge trade secrets. and he liked me well enough. He just said, Jim, don't let it kill you. That's strange. How's the job going to kill me? I found out, the stress level was way up there.
Oh, really?
But, and then when they sold that, he come down and did divulge all his secrets, but a little too late to him. But the tools then, that was something. Carol run the office in front and handle sales. I run the CNC machines, and then I had a guy that would work. He come in from Alaska, and he said he wanted a job for 4 hours a day. He didn't want to work 4.5. He didn't want to work 3.5. He wanted 4 hours a day. And he stayed with me for 9 years, and he done all the grinding back there. And he's one of them guys that he didn't mind standing in front of a grinder or polisher all day long.
As long as it was for 4 hours.
Yeah. He just didn't want to go a minute over. That guy was a lot of help. He could get all that done in that time. Sometimes I had to hook up to give him enough to keep going.
Really?
But that was the tool business right there, just 2.5 of us. And, Carol, she liked to fell over backwards. I said, I can start making hammers here, but I'm going to have about $250 a hammer for that. Oh, you'll never sell them. Well, right now I look at the hammers, and there's a lot of competition out there. That's the only thing keeping them down. Some of those hammers out there could probably go for $500 if there wasn't so much other choices available.
Right.
They didn't have other choices then. Very few other choices. I was in on the ground floor of that thing. I got started right kind of after Jay Sharp got out of it.
Right.
And so it was kind of new field for me, and it worked well.
No kidding. And you said Jim Poor was a friend of yours, right?
Yeah.
Like you guys sort of swapped ideas back and forth. And
Jim is a very clever individual. He's thinking all the time. I don't think he quits thinking when he goes to sleep, but he's always coming up with something, and he's got a good eye for design. You know, we got a lot of other people. You know, Austin Eads Austin used to work for me.
oh, okay.
I don't think I taught him anything, but he picked that up on his own. But he's got a tremendous eye for design. I mean, he can make eye-appealing things. And really, in this industry now, there's a lot of good tools out there, but if you can add some eye appeal to it,
Mm-hmm.
you can make more off of it and you can sell more of it. So,
We do like shiny stuff.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, the tools was just an offshoot of when the shoemaking door closed, it was ready to open that door into the tool making. Of course, I started making tools before the shoemaking door. So, and then when I sold the tool making business, I was going to retire. I actually went back to shoeing for a while and went back to taking on a couple of apprentices. And about 3 years ago, I didn't have anybody there to help me, and I had to shoe 2 horses. And I got so weak and tired, I said, what in the heck am I doing this for? And so I quit then.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when my artwork, I started spending more time with artwork, because that's not nearly as physical as shoeing a horse.
Right.
And writing.
Yeah, and hence the book, which is full of your artwork as well.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we discussed in the past just your artwork and how you learned that skill. And would you mind sharing that story?
Well, I've always liked to draw. In fact, I got in trouble in school way back in the 5th and 6th grade. You know, they used to have study halls in schools. I don't doubt that most people even know what that term is now, but you had a period in there at least once a day where you could go, group of you in there, and you could go in there and do your lessons from other classes and not have to take homework home. And because that was the day when kids had to go home and had other activities to do, farm work or whatever.
Right.
Sometimes athletics. But anyway, they give you a little bit of time in the day where you didn't have to take homework. Well, I used study hall as a drawing class. I'd check a Will James book out of the library and reproduce all his drawings there. And so I enjoyed doing that. Then when I went to work on the ranch, I kind of got away from it, but I got into other arts. I made saddles for a while. I made bits and spurs. Being able to visualize a finished product from a hunk of raw materials is part of the process, and if it works in one media, it'll usually help you out in another media.
Right.
And then I got to rodeo, and that kind of like blew the hell out of everything. But you can only rodeo so long.
Mm-hmm.
Then I went in the Army, and that ended the saddle making, and I got back. I got injured in the Army, not in wartime. I was in during Vietnam, but I didn't go to Vietnam. But I got blown off a tank in Fort Knox, Kentucky with a water cannon, and it injured my right hip and made my whole leg black, and I developed a lot of blood clots and pulmonary embolisms from that. And then that hip got where I couldn't ride a horse all day like I used to, but I could still shoe a horse all day. So that's when I went more into full-time shoeing.
Wow.
And stayed with that until I got a job teaching it, and then it become, well, it was still full-time involved with shoeing, but
Mm-hmm.
wasn't running a shoeing business. And got into competing, and I've always been pretty competitive.
And how long did you compete for?
Well, I competed from the early 80s up until,
last
I
night.
competed last night. Yeah, 2 hours ago.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
But, I haven't entered any major contests since probably 2008, somewhere in there.
Okay. That's about the time I started.
Is that right?
Yeah. And with your art, you had also mentioned, like most of the things, it seems to be a reoccurring theme with you where you watch other people do it and then recreate it that way? Like you were saying you had some clients that were artists as well, right?
Yes.
And just sort of followed that path. Do you think that was a skill that you could teach people, or that was just you either had it or you don't?
I'm not sure on that. I know a lot of people have it, and I know some people that have it. I mean, they can, and I've had some students, they could watch me do something, draw a clip, and then turn around and draw one better than mine, just from watching.
Yeah.
So it's observation. We learn by observation, and sometimes we have to be spoon-fed every bite we get of education, and other people have to read it and then do it and practice it, and some people can just pick it up right quick. And like I say, I've had a number of students, some of them big time down here, that have that ability.
Mm-hmm.
So if I could ever see something done, before you can do anything, you've got to advantage it. You got to have a mental image of it. Just like when I first saw them guys in 81 making draft shoes in an hour.
Mm-hmm.
I had no concept of that. Once they instilled that in me, then I knew it could be done.
It was a possibility, yeah.
But I don't know how we could teach that. I've tried to. I work a lot on observation skills and perspective. And, I did take a drawing class in college. It was figure drawing. And when you look at the other students working there, they had trouble with what they call foreshortening. When you look at my arm like that, that's a foreshortened arm.
Right.
And a lot of people would draw it as an arm, and it looked like some mangled up thing out to the side here. But it's learning to see what's there, not what you think is there.
Right.
And that's about as close as they ever come to that. They got to see what is actually there and not what they think is there. Your mind can lie to you.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Mine's very guilty of that.
All of us to some extent.
Part of the reason we're here today is through the introduction through our mutual friend, Chris. And he came to visit you quite often at your school, did he not?
Yeah. When he first started teaching up at Lakewood, he had me up there as guest for a few times, and then we've competed together and
okay.
As a team. I've known him for quite a while. He was, I think I put that in the forward to his book about first I met him, our first time I knew him, he was in college, and he mailed me a couple of instant coffee and packet of sugar.
That's right. Yeah. It is in the intro.
I mean, that was something nobody else had ever done. So it drew my attention to him. Yeah, he's pretty thorough guy.
Yes, he is. Yeah. No stone left unturned when he's after something. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I guess the other thing I would ask you is, what changes have you seen, or what advice could you give somebody who's just starting out now in this career?
With the flood of information in there is, we got so many scientific papers and articles and stuff in there, and those are good, but I think that's really more for the advanced person, the one that's got the basics down first.
Yeah.
And it all boils down to basics, horseshoeing life. I mean, if you take care of the basics first, then you can branch out into the other aspects of it.
Right.
In there. The opportunities are incredible now for somebody to get help. I would strongly recommend somebody serving an apprenticeship with a qualified instructor. That wasn't available when I was wanting it. In fact, that's one of the reasons you asked me about how I got into teaching, and that was because when I started out, I desperately wanted help and couldn't get it.
Mm-hmm.
And so once I got a little bit of experience, well, I wanted to pass that on.
You became that person. Yeah.
But again, it boils down to basics. I don't care how much stuff comes out or how many products come out in here. If it's not fitting a basic need of you or your horses, then you need to reevaluate things.
Yeah. Well, that is good advice. This portion of the podcast is called the Stratum Tectorium. These are the short answer, surface stuff questions, but it's okay if the guest wants to go deeper. Enjoy. What is your favorite book?
My favorite book? That's one of the security questions I have on one of my computers.
Oh,
And of
well,
course,
everybody take note of this.
I always write down a book I'm very familiar with. No, my favorite book, the ones I used to, it changes. The ones I used to read, of course, my goals were different in school when I was a kid, was Will James' book. Everyone is.
You mentioned that in your book, right? A couple times.
Right now, I don't read as much as I should. Again, it's attention span and eyeglasses. I read so long and I got to quit. So I prefer more short articles to the point, and I really dislike those that have to have a long build up and beat their way around the bush for a long time.
Yep.
So good practical information. And I read a book not too long ago that I really liked. I can't think of the name.
Oh, that's okay. I was asked this exact same question and I couldn't remember. So, did you have a favorite brand of nails?
Well, we didn't have a choice years ago. Capel was the only nail.
That was it.
I used it, and I still use it. But now, somewhere along in the 90s or maybe the 80s, somewhere, they had a little problems in manufacturing. Capel had little microscopic slivers on them. You drive that nail into the foot, and they would flare out.
Really?
Boy, you couldn't drive them. They just bend. I mean, they wouldn't go any further.
Oh, okay.
It was like a reverse barb on it. And so I really like Cooper nails when they come on. Cooper was an English nail.
Oh, okay.
And it sold in 5-pound boxes, just like Capel, and it was priced competitively, but it was a lot cleaner nail. Now, Capel did clean their nails up, but I mean, they went through, like any manufacturer, they went through some, I don't know, machinery problem, manufacturing problem, but their product fluctuated in quality.
Oh, okay. I
still use Capel nails to some extent because Cooper has been gobbled up by Mustad. And,
okay.
Mustad was a real durable nail, but I never did. It was too stiff a nail for my liking, so I never did use too many Mustad. Now, up on draft horses, bigger horses, I would use a Mustad nail. I used to shoe saddlebreds, and Mustad wasn't available here then, but I did use Capels on all those. And they had a number 12 nail.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I still have some of them. Then for a while, I was a dealer on Derby. It's made by the same company that makes what's in the yellow box now, that Lute Vanderlyn. These are made in Bogota, Colombia.
Oh, okay. I don't know.
Anyway, it's that yellow box, and I use a lot of them. And those, well, I still shoe and fuel ties. Those were probably my favorite, and I can't even remember the name of them. But main thing, because they were more uniform, box to box, and
that is
and
one
the
thing.
price was a little better. So
yeah, very important.
Delta.
Oh, okay, gotcha. Yeah, I don't know why I didn't know that.
I don't know why I couldn't remember.
What shoe sizes did you generally have the most stock of?
Ones and aughts. I shot a lot of quarter horses mainly, and that part of the world, that's about all there is there
right
now. And most of them fit a 1 or an aught. Now, for a while, I shot saddlebreds, but of course they sized them by weight. I mean, they did have sizes too, but weight was the important thing. They want a 16-ounce shoe or whatever, and so we had to make those.
Oh, okay.
So we had to compute round bar stock, weight per inch, till we get the amount of weight they was wanting. And
right.
then we'd have that bar there, and we'd usually have to draw it out until it would cover the area we wanted to cover and still remain the weight, desired weights.
Oh, okay.
I didn't stay with that too long, but that was a very educational experience in there.
Time consuming, probably not a huge moneymaker if you're.
The boys that can do that all the time probably live pretty well. But where I was at, the horses were somewhat difficult to get along. I don't know whether that's typical in the trade, but they're kept confined in the stall so much, mainly to protect the package that's on them. Mm-hmm. And they're like a prisoner that's been solitary confinement. They're a little goofy when they come out of it.
Yep. And you're the first person they see when they come out. Did you have a favorite make of Rasp?
Again, that changed over the years as Rasp come along. And
Yeah.
I don't know, the last Rasp I bought were probably the Legend Rasp. Who makes
Like the Heller?
Yeah, the Heller Legend. I used some of the Rasp that Mustad made, mainly just because Marguerite and all them people were so easy to deal with.
Right.
Rasp, they're probably worse than nails. Nails have
No
difficulties in manufacturing.
Consistency problems.
So, and one thing, if you got some bad ones, they were easy to deal with. I mean, they
to
were
replace them.
So, that service is
like us.
Right after, if you have a quality problem, the service you get is the next most important thing.
Yep, for sure. Did you have a dream Farrier rig?
I never had a Farrier rig like they have now.
Yeah.
Again, the range we used to go, I started off shoeing in a 1953 Chevy pickup half-ton, 6-cylinder engine, and you could go for miles, and gas was 13 cents a gallon.
Yep.
And available most places. Then I went through vans, I went through pulling trailers, and I got to where I shot for a while out of a car. I had a big Mercury car with a big trunk and air shocks on it, and I carried a 250-pound vise in the back of it, and I had a spring-assisted mechanism, and I could pull that Anvil up and out of that trunk
No way.
with one hand, set the Anvil off on a tripod, and then set a gas forge on top of that stand there, and I set up, and I competed with that.
Really?
And
you had a nice smooth ride the whole time.
And that thing, it rode like a car.
Yeah.
No, it was usually out of pickups with camper on them, and probably the one I didn't like was a van, and mainly, you had a lot of room in it. You put a lot of stuff in it, but it wasn't fly time.
Yeah.
You hauled a van load of flies around and
Constantly. Yeah. You're never separate from them.
But I never had a rig, these big boxes they have on here now, they're neat, they're nice, but they're expensive. And in the 90s, I started doing all my work out of the shop. I saw very few horses out in the field.
Oh, okay.
They were hauling them into me, and sometimes they hauled them a long way. They drove by a lot of good horseshoers getting to me. I don't quite understand that. But I had them coming from Arizona and Spearfish and South Dakota.
Wow.
And Houston, Texas.
Well, that's when you've got a pretty good thing going for you, isn't it? Your reputation. Favorite rounding hammer?
Well, rounding hammer. I used, it's a long story here. Diamond used to be the only rounding hammer. Now, Diamond, I was a lineman briefly when I first moved to town off the ranch until I got my shoeing business going. And they made a hammer. It was a rounding hammer, and that was called a lineman's hammer. I was to drive them big lag bolts into poles and stuff like that. So I got acquainted with a rounding hammer there. Before then, I'd used a machinist hammer, the little cross-beam type machinist hammer to shape shoes.
Okay.
When I got to making shoes, we done it with Diamond. And here's, I'll let you know some secrets here. In 1988, we was on the team with Grant, and we were going to go to England and compete with that. Of course, Grant was familiar with both sides of the ocean. Then Jim Poor and Don Sester and we'd get together at one of our shops every week or two and practice. And the Calgary shoes were getting so, they kept shortening the times and increasing the degree of difficulty.
Yeah.
That, you had to get back on the end of a long stick and just really whale the heck out of it. So Diamond was a little bit too heavy for that, and their handles was too short, so we got putting longer handles in there, and we'd take some weight out of the sides.
Okay.
Thing. And that Diamond pyramid shape that Jim Poor's first hammers come out.
Yeah.
kind of come from that because that's the easiest way to take a side grinder and grind that stuff out of there. But we wanted the wider face to cover more area, but we needed to get more whip and velocity out of that thing. We worked with a lot of different handles there, and that's when we had the long sticks. Before they used to want us handle to come up
To
here
your
at the
elbow,
ends of
right?
this, and that still works. But if you really want to move metal, you just take a step back from that handle and use all that leverage out there.
Yep.
But I can't do that anymore. But I noticed Grant's even shortening up his handle.
Oh, really? Yeah.
That caused a lot of changes in the way we were forging, just being forced to do so much in such a short time.
Right.
And it really improved a lot of people's forging styles. But then Calgary kind of backed off of that and went toward wanting more quality because some of the quality was really suffering.
Right. We're just trying to meet the time limits.
I used my rounding hammers for a while, but today I use Mark Milster's rounding hammer.
Oh, okay.
The weight, one of the designer, the weight just fit me. It was a 3-pounder.
Oh, wow.
And I didn't think I could swing a 3-pounder, but I did.
Yeah. Well, it's amazing when you get the right one,
Mm-hmm.
it just feels right. Favorite type of bar stock to work with?
Well, a bar stock was, unless you get into concave, it's all very similar. It's, if you mean size, we went through in the early days, the FA convention the contest was using a lot of 1/4 by 3/4.
Really?
Yes. And I like 1/4 by 3/4. A lot of the handmade therapeutic shoes that I put on horses. And one thing, you see all the stuff now about the suspensory shoes, how they got to put that flotation in there.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you can do somewhat the same thing if you use a thinner shoe and get that sole closer to the ground.
Right.
Also, so most of my crippled horses, their therapeutic shoeing job was done with 1/4 by 3/4, and that's a little bit, it's a holdover from that's what we were using a long time ago. And then it
Okay.
moved up to 5/16, and we thought 5/16 was awful heavy. But
And now it's
then
3/8.
3/8. And I love working 3/8. But on the horses the crippled horses, I didn't use much 3/8 on them. The only one I used 3/8 on is if I needed a side bone shoe, and 3/8 makes a beautiful side bone shoe.
Right.
It's got a lot of more action to it than you can put on 1/4 inch.
Yeah. No kidding. Yep. In some cases, like I have a lot of vets ask for aluminum because of the weight on a
Mhm.
crippled horse. So the 1/4 inch would be closer to that in
Yeah.
that sense as well, right?
1/4 inch is probably very close to 3/8 aluminum.
Right.
And I don't think the weight has ever been a major factor unless it's an unbalanced weight.
Right.
To me, that I think most horses, and I know they do, think they handle 3/8 about as well as they do 1/4 inch. One of the first lessons I learned, I can't remember, I got it through Chris Collis in England. He done a lot of research on navicular horses, and I've never got to meet the man, and I don't know whether he's alive or what century he practiced in, but somewhere along the line, I don't even know where I got that. But anyway, his recommendation was for soundness in horses, should have a short, balanced foot. That two things. And, balance is nebulous. So you can argue about that all day. We can all pretty much tell what's short.
Yep.
And see, 3/8 versus 1/4 inch, that's an 1/8 of an inch length. That's a week or two's growth on that foot. So that
Right.
kind of defeats the short part. So it's a horse. And then another axiom I got soaked into my head early on, that if your shoe's resettable, you're putting too much iron on that horse. And I hated to reset shoes. I'd rather put new iron
Really?
on. And because basically on keg shoes, I could fit up a new one quicker than I could clean up an old one.
Right.
So I didn't reset many of those when they were cheap. But unless you could still read the brand name and the toe, I'd reset But now handmaids, if you went to a lot of trouble to make one and it was still fit, well, I did reset those, but I really, on keg shoes, I very seldom ever reset one.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting. What's your favorite pastime after work?
Oh, boy. You talking about when I used to shoe horses or now?
Well, either, yeah.
Well, now it's gardening. I go home, make a garden. Shoot, I grow a lot of chili out in New Mexico.
Oh.
And found out the best fertilizer is 4 inches of rain in 2 months. But no, it used to be go forge, go build something, go make something that somebody could use.
Okay.
And then later on, it got to be go put a rear end in a recliner. Mechanic work.
Right. What was your ideal number of horses to shoe all around in one day?
Well, that varied quite a bit from the beginning to the end of my career, but I have shot as many as 20 head on several different occasions.
Wow.
And this was cold keg shoes with good help holders and whatever.
Yeah.
They didn't do any of the finished work, but you go to some of them ranches up there where they were in the rocks, the feet were generally pretty well naturally worn down, so there's very little hoof prep. Their soles were so hard you didn't do any knife work on them, so I could knock out 20 on several occasions, and that wasn't the goal, though. But when I was on the road up into the Oklahoma Panhandle, into southwestern Kansas and southeastern Colorado and the Texas Panhandle, I would need 12 to make it a day to make the trip pay for itself. I didn't charge travel charges, but if I had 12 horses, that would pay for itself.
Right.
And I preferred 15. And if I had somebody catching horses, I could average a horse over 30 minutes.
Really?
Again, this perspective, that started before I got involved with the AFA.
Right. Yeah.
And the only horse shoer I know, he gave a lot of stories about shoeing 30 head a day and stuff like that. And I finally figured out that there's not enough time in a day to shoe 30 head of horses. But and he always preached that it shouldn't take over 5 minutes per foot. And so if you took 5 minutes per foot, that's 20 minutes of the horse. Now that gives you 10 minutes to goof around if you want to shoe a horse every 30 minutes.
Wow. You must have done a lot of goofing around on those 20 days. Next thing on your bucket list.
Oh, boy, I've had that bucket list pretty well filled up, but something will pop up that I hadn't even thought about.
You seem like you always have another project.
Yeah.
Always have.
Well, I guess on my bucket list, I want to get another book out of the way.
That would be great. We were just talking about that. You're planning on doing an actual Farrier.
I've got some of it. I'm going to put it in a lot of nice to know stuff. I want to, for a book, you got to have a lot of need to know stuff for people in there to make it worth their while. But sometimes you can put in a nice to know. One thing, my college thesis was on the evolution of the horse. And of course, southwestern United States is where Eohippus, which is not the correct name for the Don horse, was. So we've had horses in this part of the world until up to 10,000 years ago. And then we lost them, and then they come back from Europe with the Spaniards. So,
okay.
But I've always been fascinated with the archaeology in this area. I don't care anything about dinosaurs, but I've always liked the study of the horse and how they developed, and their perspective on evolution is not, they didn't adapt to the conditions, but they come pre-adapt for those conditions. I mean, before we had grasslands here, we had to have an animal that could handle grass with their dentition. So the ones that had dentition that would handle the grass were the ones that survived, and others didn't.
Right.
So it's a pre-adaptation instead of an adaptation to that. And the horse has been very, very fortunate in that aspect. What killed them off 10,000 years ago, in my opinion, was probably some disease that was communicable from humans or their dogs or other animals they may have had when they come back to this part of the world that the horses couldn't have. I mean, 10,000 Aborigines, if you want to call it, couldn't eat all the horses in western New Mexico. Well, it had to be something like a disease related or maybe climate related, but
Right.
other large animals lived, so probably wasn't climate related.
Yeah. Yeah. And
I mean, a little bit of stuff like that in there, just to lighten up this thing. And it's amazing how many horse shearers don't know much about the prehistory of the horse.
Yeah.
And not that they need to know it, but it's anything you know about the horse is probably going to be beneficial to you somewhere along the way.
yeah, it's going to come in handy somewhere. What was your favorite brand of keg shoe?
Again, in the beginning, we were restricted. The only keg shoe we could get when I started was Phoenix. And it was in a keg. I mean, a little wooden keg.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Is that where that term comes from?
Yeah.
Oh,
they were sold in 100-pound kegs. So different sizes, you got different numbers in there, different number of shoes.
Really?
Big, heavy, big shoes where you got 100 pounds of whatever you bought.
Oh, okay.
Then they switched from kegs to boxes, baseboard boxes. But they then sold them in, half kegs, I think. And then they eventually went to pounds, just straight 25-pound boxes. And the reason they went to 25, and see, it's a relatively new feature for me, not for you. This happened before you started. But that was what the little lady in the stocking room could handle was 25 pounds.
Right,
So,
100-pound.
yeah, 100
lugging it
pounds was a
around.
quarter keg. And so they wanted to make it where the dealer, and that's something in shoemaking. That's what surprises me right now is when I was manufacturing shoes, we were really working on getting front and hind patterns, but most of my dealers didn't want that. Said we have to stock too many items to keep in there. So the more sizes and styles and whatever you make, they didn't want it. But I guess they're accepting it pretty well now because that's basically what the market is.
Yeah, no kidding. It would be a nightmare to keep track of all of the shoes. I don't envy the supply houses. Favorite Anvil?
I really like hay button for blacksmithing anvils. They're old-time anvil. You can't find them pretty good. I've probably managed to own 7 or 8 of them. I got one little one over 114-pound one. But I guess my favorite anvil now is cold swaw. I got a 540-pound cold swaw in my shop, and I got a 286 one in reserve. and I even made a anvil. I made 2 anvils. One of them completely fabricated by me, and one that I made the pattern for and had cast. And they're not the best steel in the world, but they were made as prototypes for truck anvil.
Okay.
And they would be usable for both hot and cold shewers. So I don't know. I guess cold swaw right now. Cold swaw would be my favorite anvil because that's what I have.
Okay.
But I've used a lot of others over the years, and they all had their good points and some not so good points.
Favorite inspirational quote?
I don't know. I got on someplace. I quoted Reggie Kester from Oklahoma Horseshoe School, Oklahoma State Horseshoe School. Were you aware of him? Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. He just kept saying it ain't rocket science. And I always like that because even though there's a science to it, so many people tend to overthink everything and overcomplicate it. It's kind of nice to get pulled back down to just looking at it and working with what you have there and not what you think is going on underneath. You get to overthinking it. It's like the artwork, where if you piddle with it too long, it loses its freshness. I think that's the same way with shoeing.
You're right. Yep. You can overdo it. Did you have a favorite shoe package for a mystery lameness when you didn't know what exactly it was?
From the years I studied at O.R. Adams in lameness, I can go through a process of elimination. You eliminate everything you can, and that only leaves 1, 2, or 3 things it could possibly be. So if it's really something that's got me befuddled, and so far it's been quite a while since I've been totally befuddled. I've been wrong a time or two, but again, that short, well-balanced foot thing it comes in. Don't add leverage where you don't need leverage. The majority of horses that used to come to me from long distance off went well with side bone shoe.
Okay.
When they took him out there on the lunge line and that sucker's given to that foot on the lunge line and he's going well and straight, well, side bone shoe is the number one thing to do for him. And again, most of that side bone shoe was there to sometimes compensate for years of being off level.
Right. Where the damage was already done.
That was always on the list. I don't know. We used to use heart bars on a lot of them. Well, when Bernie first come out with those in 1982, we put heart bars on everything and resected a lot of feet that didn't need to be resected. But no, I occasionally use a heart bar, especially if you got severe trauma to walls near the heel area or something like that.
Oh, okay. Man, these questions have been very fruitful. I'm learning all kinds of stuff. Favorite method of soothing aches and pains?
On horses or people?
On you.
I have been real fortunate. I've not had back problems. I get tired, but I've not had too many orthopedic problems or bone pain or bog. And it's getting longer now, but I used to could recover quickly. That's how you shoot 15 head of horses a day. You can recover during the lunch break.
Yeah.
And some people take 2 or 3 days to recover, but I've always been able to recover quickly. And so I haven't had a whole lot of aches and pains. I'm getting a few of them now, but I really hated to mask them. Taking painkillers was not the thing I wanted to do. I wanted to know how bad I was hurting.
Right.
I didn't want to just hide it and keep going. Now,
and do real damage.
In severe cases, well, I did do that method, but so no, I really didn't have a method for hiding that. Just take care of your body. Don't overprotect it. Don't pamper it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like anything else, you got to have calluses on your hand to keep them hands tough enough to handle the job.
Right. Now, for anybody who reads your book, it will come as quite a surprise that you don't have more orthopedic problems from the number of falls and being chucked into things. And
well, I used to bounce pretty good.
Maybe that's where you're.
And really, I wasn't a good rodeo rider. I wasn't limber enough in the joints to get a full stroke on a bucking horse, but I went 3 years without getting bucked off. So I didn't take as many falls as
it seems in the book. Yeah. It's just those are the better stories.
Mm-hmm.
Favorite drink?
Again, that varies. I go from, I used to be a big coffee snob, and boy, I drank a lot of coffee. Now I drink very little coffee. I used to drink a lot of, at one point in my life, every brand of beer made was my favorite at the time. But now I'm on to Youngling.
Okay.
Yeah. That's I got to get some before I leave Texas. But
a fresh batch.
No, I normally, especially in summertime, I like iced tea.
Yeah.
Mid sweetness. I don't like the sweet stuff.
Well, that's one of the main reasons I come down to the U.S. is to have proper iced tea.
Is that right?
Oh yeah, we just can't seem to get it right up in Canada.
Mm-hmm.
Favorite genre of music?
A little variation there, but not as much as other things we got in here. I like old time country western. I got a lot of friends that are western ballads. R.W. Hampton. I've worked with him. Him and I spent a tour at the Smithsonian back in '92. Are you familiar with R.W. Hampton?
No.
He was over here in Dallas just last weekend, the Red Steagle thing, but it's Western cowboy music.
Oh, okay.
And I got Doug Figs down there. He's a certified journeyman horse shoer, and he still shoes horses, but he's gone to all these singing things, and he writes his own music, and it's Western cowboy music.
Oh, I'll have to look those
And
fellas up.
and I like some regular country and Western, and I like some pop music.
Okay.
And I like something I can hear and understand the words to. If I can't hear and understand the words,
Not so
becomes
much.
noise to me.
Yeah. Did you work out when you were working?
I didn't do too much actual workout in there. I do more now that I've got more time. And I have been working out quite a bit in the last 3 months because, boy, that when I was down with that corona disease, it really, I lost a lot of weight, and most of it was muscle.
Oh, really?
And so I've been doing a lot of push-ups. I don't do full push-ups anymore. I do half ones. I get elevated a little on the front. And I do dumbbells, curls with dumbbells and stuff like that. And I'm supposed to be walking, but I hate to walk. That's one of the things that makes a better bronc rider out of you. She hates to walk. But
Motivation to stay on.
But used to have to do some stretching exercises when I was working hard because you tend to stiffen up, and I have stiffened up. I got a lot of contractures now, like this arm won't straighten out anymore than what it is.
Well, I bet after a lifetime of...
And again, that's probably from holding on to horses' hind feet that I should have let go,
Yep. Yeah. I was going to say, I'm surprised you weren't working out more on the times when you were just doing 20 horses a day. You had that 10 minutes a horse to mess around. You could have been working out.
Yeah. Yeah, I missed that opportunity. If you got time for a story here.
Of course.
I went up to a ranch up in the rocks in north of Tucumcari, and this is really rocky. I'd worked up there time before. In fact, that story, what happened when JFK got killed.
Right, yeah.
That story was based on some of that country, and it was extremely rocky. Very few roads, so everything was done horseback. And I went up there and the neighboring ranch up there, and this guy was known as an eccentric tightwad. And I wasn't sure I was going to get paid, but his foreman got me up there, and they helped me. I mean, him and his boys, they had them horses caught, and I shot 20 head there. And like most places, when it comes quitting time, the owner's gone.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Gotta go get hay or something.
So I left the bill, but this guy comes down to the house about 4 days later, and he gets out of his car, and they used to have them big, humongous checkbooks.
Yeah.
And he's walking up there, packing that big checkbook up there, and he's shaking his head all the way up that walk. And he's going to bellyache about the price of this thing. There's 20 head, and I think I was doing $14 a head then. But that was still a pretty good wage for those days. And he comes in there and he said, "They lost that ticket. Can you make me out a new one?" So I pulled out a copy of it and give it to him. And he's shaking his head and he's writing the check out. And he hadn't never said anything yet. And then I said, "Is everything all right? You have any questions or problems with my pricing?" And he says, "No, I just can't believe somebody shoe that many horses." And he said, then he told me, he went on to tell me, he said, "That's the cheapest I ever got by." I said, "Them boys take 3 weeks to shoe them 20 head of horses." He said, "Then I got to pay their chiropractor." So that's when I realized there was room for a professional horse shoer.
Right. Yep. That's great. What would you have been if not a farrier?
I had choices when I turned in farrier. I moved to town off a ranch, and I'd been shoeing on ranches and shoeing the boss's horses, and occasionally a friend's roping horse or something like that. And I moved into town, and I went to work for a municipally owned power plant, and I was a lineman. And I got pretty much up on that. I got my journeyman electrician's license.
Oh, really?
And I actually wired some of the buildings, some of the city buildings there in Tucumcari at the time. And I was shoeing horses evenings and weekends and all that stuff. So I had that business going. And when I left that job, I reached the top of the pay scale, and I come to the realization that I was the only one that was capable of getting an unconscious man off of a pole. And I was usually the only man up a pole.
Well, that doesn't really bode well for you.
So I thought that I'd get my contractor's license. And I went to look into that, and gosh, it's going to cost me $20,000 just to get started in the inventory and whatever.
Right.
And I thought, well, I'll try horseshoeing for a while. Went from part-time to full-time there. And this was on 31st of December when I quit the city. And it come the biggest snowstorm and ice storm, and that phone would not ring. And I was ready to go, after 14 days in the house, I was ready to go beg for my job back because I knew they were working.
Yeah, they're probably fixing all the stuff from the storm.
Finally, the phone rang. It was a feedlot in Cimarron, Oklahoma, up in the Panhandle, Oklahoma. And I took off during this ice storm. I went up there, and I shot 60 head of horses. It took me 4 days to do it because I kind of slow down when it gets real cold.
Yeah, we all do.
That right there started the whole thing, started the ball rolling because there was people hunting horseshoers in the Oklahoma Panhandle and southwestern Kansas, and the word got out, and boy, I was getting cold. I was spending about half my time up there.
Oh, really?
So a lot of farmers up in that area, and see, Tucumcari is ranching country, and they shut down in the winter. Business really slows down. But I went up there, and all them farmers, they farm all summer, and then they rope all winter. They got indoor barns.
Oh, okay.
So that was a good trade-off.
No kidding. Yeah.
I winter pretty well up in there, except that's a cold country. You think Canada's cold, you ought to come to western Oklahoma. There's nothing between there and the North Pole at all.
I'll take your word for it.
My boys and I, when they're home, we started a lot of colts. I like starting green colts. I didn't like starting green horseshoeing students, but I couldn't put a finish on a horse like a lot of people can. So my forte was starting green colts, handling when they're. So the boys had grown up and chose went other directions, and both of them can shoe a horse, but they don't need to.
Right.
So
yeah.
I went back into riding horses for other people. Again, my hip was giving me problems on long, hard rides. And so that was kind of put on a back burner.
Yeah.
And become a licensed electrical contractor.
Huh.
That would have probably worked out pretty well. But again, you get back into employee situations, and tell you what, some people can handle employees pretty well, but I can handle employees that want to work, but I can't handle employees that just want a job.
Yeah, and it's tough to find that.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
So
that magic mix.
Mm-hmm. Anyway, when I got to the Army, I went through that battery of tests that they give you, aptitude test, and they told me I needed to do something with my hands. So they recommended carpenter. I don't mind carpenter work, but I'm not really drawn to it. But horseshoeing was a good substitute for carpentry.
Right up your alley.
Yeah.
And thankfully, that's the route you took for all of us.
Uh-huh.
One final question. I call it the COVID question. If you were in a lockdown, stuck in a shop for a month with somebody, who would you want it to be?
Who would I want it to be? I don't know. There's probably several people that could. If we were in the shop, I'd want somebody that was enthusiastic about producing something. Dead time. Mm-hmm. I do a lot more dead time now simply because I'm too weak to do it. But somebody's busy and enthusiastic to be in. So there's a number of people, and a lot of horseshoers would fit in that bill.
Yeah.
I don't get too irritable with people unless they're not putting out a reasonable effort or not putting out the work that I think they're capable of. And
yep.
I guess most horseshoers probably in that same category.
Yeah.
So I couldn't put a name on anybody, but there's a lot of
That's all
people
right.
out there.
I wouldn't force your hand. Well, and that was it. I really appreciate that you took the time to do this, Jim. This has been amazing. I'm really glad that Chris arranged this, and thank you.
Okay, well, I appreciate you asking me, and hope you don't wear out your edit button nowhere.
No, well, mostly on me, probably. And I'm looking forward to that next book.
Okay. Okay, well, thank you, Brian.